What if oil didn't just lose value, but suddenly became worthless? What if the resource that powered the global economy for over a century, shaping wars, borders, currencies, and entire civilizations, simply stopped mattering? Not gradually, not over decades, but within a single historical moment. A silent economic shockwave moving faster than governments, markets, and institutions can react. Imagine a world where ultra-cheap renewables flood the energy market, where AI-optimized grids predict demand with near-perfect accuracy, and where efficiency becomes so extreme that oil is no longer needed to sustain growth. At first, it looks like progress. Cleaner energy, lower costs, technological triumph. But beneath the surface, something far more destabilizing begins to unfold. Global markets hesitate. Energy stocks bleed value. Oil-exporting nations feel an unfamiliar pressure as their economic foundations begin to crack. The global economy, what a scenario no one prepared for, starts to take shape. This is not just an energy transition. It's a structural rupture in the alternate economy of the future. Megacorporations powered by AI move faster than states. Algorithms replace traders. Automated systems reprice risk in seconds. Entire sectors realize their core asset no longer commands power. What you're witnessing is not a crisis of supply, but a collapse of relevance. Stay with me until the end of the simulation. What you're about to discover may change how you see future predictions, economic stability, and the idea of value itself. Because this timeline isn't about oil alone. It's about what happens when the foundation of the world economy disappears without warning. This scenario might feel extreme, but perhaps it's closer to reality than it seems. And it's exactly here, at the moment oil stops being essential, that this alternate timeline begins to take form. If this scenario resonates with you, if this alternate economy feels plausible, unsettling, or even inevitable, let me know. A short comment about what stood out so far helps shape how these simulations evolve, and it shows that serious discussions about the global economy still matter. And if this analysis adds value to the way you think about future predictions, a simple like quietly signals that this kind of work deserves to reach others exploring similar questions. If you want to follow more global economy, what if scenarios, timelines where AI, megacorporations, and economic systems collide in unexpected ways, subscribing keeps you inside these simulations as they unfold. This isn't about numbers or algorithms alone. It's about understanding the forces that may redefine our world. Now, let's return to the timeline. Because once oil loses its role at the center of the global economy, the consequences don't arrive slowly. They arrive in waves. And the first years of this collapse reshape everything we thought was stable. In the first years of this timeline, the collapse doesn't arrive with explosions or dramatic headlines. It arrives silently, through spreadsheets, fiscal reports, and currency charts that no longer make sense. Oil-exporting nations are hit first. Government revenues shrink at a speed no economic model had seriously prepared for. Budgets collapse. Social programs are frozen. Sovereign reserves meant to secure decades of stability are drained just to keep systems running. Across the global economy, millions of jobs connected to oil extraction, refining, logistics, and petrochemical supply chains begin to vanish. Entire regions built around energy infrastructure fall into sudden decline. What was once a predictable career path becomes obsolete almost overnight. The impact spreads into everyday life. Weakened currencies, shrinking pensions, delayed retirements, and a growing uncertainty about the future. Stability stops feeling permanent. As the shock deepens, governments and central banks move into emergency mode. Interest rates are adjusted aggressively. Capital controls reappear. Some states attempt to nationalize collapsing energy giants, hoping to slow the damage. Others step back, allowing market forces to erase institutions that once seemed untouchable. Behind the scenes, megacorporations move with far more precision. AI-driven firms reallocate capital in real time, acquiring distressed assets, infrastructure, and data networks at fractions of their former value. Power doesn't disappear, it concentrates. Now the timeline accelerates. Over the next decade, the global order begins to reorganize itself. Traditional oil powers lose diplomatic influence, while countries controlling battery minerals, semiconductor manufacturing, and AI infrastructure rise rapidly. New economic blocks form, not around oil fields, but around efficiency, automation, and energy orchestration. Geopolitics is no longer defined by who owns resources, but by who controls systems. At this point, the future splits into two extreme directions. In one version of this world, energy becomes so cheap and abundant that productivity explodes. Automation frees time, costs collapse, living standards rise, and economic abundance reshapes society. In the other, energy systems are highly efficient but tightly controlled. Access becomes permission-based. Wealth concentrates. Inequality solidifies into structure. The same technological breakthrough produces two radically different civilizations. When this new order begins to stabilize, the deepest impact is no longer financial, it's human. Work loses its traditional meaning. Identity detaches from profession. Purpose becomes uncertain in a world where survival no longer depends on labor alone. Societies struggle to redefine value, contribution, and belonging. The hidden truth of this future becomes impossible to ignore. When oil loses its role at the center of civilization, humanity is forced to confront what truly gives life meaning. Write in the comments, that makes sense to me. And from here, the most important question still remains. By the third year of this timeline, the shock has fully set in. What once felt like a market anomaly is now understood as a structural break. Governments can no longer deny the reality unfolding beneath their fiscal systems. Emergency measures become permanent tools. States step in to nationalize collapsing energy companies, not to save the past, but to slow the speed of disintegration. Sovereign wealth funds, once symbols of long-term security, are liquidated to stabilize currencies and prevent social unrest. Every decision carries weight, and every delay compounds the impact. Central banks abandon caution. Interest rates swing aggressively. Liquidity is injected where confidence has vanished. The traditional playbook no longer applies because this crisis is not cyclical. It is transformational. Behind public announcements and policy briefings, a quieter shift is taking place. Megacorporations move with a clarity governments cannot afford. AI-driven firms consolidate energy grids, data infrastructure, logistics networks, and automation platforms into unified systems. What matters now is not ownership of oil fields, but control over flow of energy, information, and capital. Over the next several years, this consolidation reshapes the global landscape. Power migrates away from nation-states toward entities capable of orchestrating complexity at scale. Decisions once made by ministries are now embedded in algorithms. The global economy reorganizes itself around efficiency rather than abundance. Along this journey, alliances fracture and reform. Countries rich in battery minerals, rare earths, and semiconductor capacity gain leverage. New economic blocs emerge, bound not by geography, but by interoperable systems and shared technological standards. Now I want to go even deeper into this scenario. As the decade unfolds, two extreme futures crystallize from the same transformation. In one, automation and cheap energy unlock an era of abundance. Costs collapse. Productivity rises. Societies redesign work, time, and distribution. Human potential expands as survival becomes less dominant. In the other, the same systems harden into gatekeepers. Access to energy and infrastructure is restricted. Efficiency exists, but only for those inside the network. Wealth concentrates, and inequality becomes structural rather than accidental. When this new order begins to stabilize, the most profound changes are internal. Daily routines shift. Careers lose their traditional role as anchors of identity. The collective mentality adjusts from accumulation to navigation. People are forced to confront uncomfortable revelations about value, relevance, and purpose. The hidden truth in the background of this future is simple and unsettling. When energy scarcity disappears, meaning does not automatically replace it. Society enters a long psychological transition, a quiet journey where decisions feel heavier and direction less certain. And beneath all of it, one unresolved tension remains, because the systems shaping this world are still evolving, and the next phase of this timeline will test how much control humanity is willing to surrender. Write in the comments, I'm on this journey too. As this timeline moves beyond the first turbulent years, the deeper transformation begins to reveal itself. By the seventh year, the global system no longer behaves like a world in crisis. It behaves like a world that has quietly accepted a new operating logic. The old centers of power, once anchored to oil reserves and export routes, continue to lose relevance. Diplomatic influence fades, not through conflict, but through irrelevance. Energy no longer grants leverage. Predictability and control do. Over the following years, AI-driven economies rise with remarkable speed. Nations that invested early in automation, data infrastructure, and energy efficiency begin to set the tempo of the global economy. Smart grids replace fossil-based networks, optimizing energy flow in real time. Autonomous manufacturing reduces dependence on labor and logistics bottlenecks. Battery supply chains become as strategically important as oil fields once were. Control over storage, not extraction, defines security. Along this journey, new economic blocs emerge. These alliances are not bound by geography or ideology, but by technological compatibility. Countries align around shared platforms, interoperable systems, and algorithmic standards. Trade is restructured around resilience rather than volume. The global map becomes less about borders and more about nodes, hubs of computation, energy orchestration, and production capacity. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario. As the decade unfolds, two extreme futures crystallize from the same transformation. In one, efficiency unlocks abundance. Energy becomes nearly invisible, embedded seamlessly into daily life. Costs collapse, productivity expands, and societies gain space to redefine priorities. This is an economy of access, where collective mentality shifts toward creativity, learning, and long-term decision-making. In the other future, the same systems harden into instruments of control. Energy is clean and efficient, but access is conditional. Algorithms determine allocation. Infrastructure is centralized. Economic participation depends on compliance and connectivity. The transformation is subtle, but its impact is profound. Inequality is no longer accidental. It is designed into the system. When this new order stabilizes, the most significant changes are no longer visible on charts or dashboards. They unfold inside people's routines. Work becomes fluid, temporary, or optional. Identity detaches from occupation. The human journey enters unfamiliar territory, where purpose is no longer enforced by scarcity. Societies wrestle with deep revelations about motivation, belonging, and meaning. The hidden truth in the background of this future is unsettling. Technological progress does not answer existential questions. It amplifies them. A new mentality begins to form, shaped by adaptation rather than ambition. Decisions feel heavier, not lighter, because freedom requires direction. And beneath the surface of this post-oil world, another transformation is still unfolding. One that will test how humanity defines value when algorithms quietly decide what matters. Write in the comments. That makes sense to me. As this alternate timeline continues to unfold, the divergence becomes impossible to ignore. What began as a shared disruption now splits into two radically different paths. In the early years, both futures look almost identical. The same technologies spread. The same oil collapse reshapes incentives. The same decisions are made under pressure. But over time, subtle differences in governance, access, and control begin to compound. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario. In the first extreme future, energy becomes nearly invisible. Its cost approaches zero, absorbed into infrastructure the way air or data once was. Automation scales without friction. Productivity explodes across manufacturing, services, and knowledge work. Small teams create outsized impact. Barriers to entry collapse. Economic abundance emerges not as excess, but as efficiency multiplied by coordination. In this world, the impact is liberating. People redesign their routines around choice rather than necessity. The collective journey shifts toward exploration, learning, and long-term thinking. But in the parallel future, the same technological foundation produces a very different civilization. Energy is clean and efficient, yet tightly monopolized. Smart grids are centralized. Storage and distribution are controlled by a handful of entities that sit at the intersection of AI, infrastructure, and finance. Access becomes conditional. Pricing is dynamic. Participation in the economy depends on permissions embedded deep inside automated systems. A new class emerges, not oil barons, but digital energy lords. Inequality is no longer a side effect. It is engineered. Over the course of the decade, these differences harden. In the abundance economy, institutions decentralize. Decision-making spreads. Communities gain resilience. In the concentration economy, systems optimize for stability and control. Risk is minimized, but so is autonomy. The same algorithms that maximize efficiency also shape behavior, incentives, and opportunity. This is the truth hidden in the background of this future. Technology does not choose values. It enforces the ones it is built upon. When this new order stabilizes, the deepest transformation is internal. Work loses its role as the primary source of identity. Careers become temporary narratives rather than lifelong anchors. Daily routines fragment and reform. People are forced to confront fundamental questions about purpose when survival is no longer the central organizing principle. The mentality collectiva shifts slowly, unevenly. Some experience freedom as expansion. Others experience it as disorientation. Revelations surface quietly. Meaning does not automatically emerge from abundance. Security does not guarantee fulfillment. In both futures, humanity faces the same unresolved tension. How to find value when energy, labor, and production are no longer scarce. The decisions made during this transition echo across generations, shaping not just economies, but cultures and inner lives. And as these two civilizations continue to evolve side by side, one question remains unresolved. Because beneath abundance and beneath concentration, another force is still taking shape, waiting to reveal its full impact. Write in the comments. I'm on this journey too. As this post-oil world matures, the most visible disruptions begin to fade into the background. Markets stabilize. Systems adapt. Energy flows quietly through automated grids. And yet, beneath this surface calm, a far deeper transformation is taking place. When this new order stabilizes, the real impact is no longer measured in prices or productivity, but in identity. Work begins to lose its historic role as the central pillar of life. For generations, employment defines status, routine, and purpose. In the first years after oil becomes irrelevant, people try to preserve that structure, clinging to familiar roles. But over time, automation and near-frictionless energy make large segments of traditional labor unnecessary. Employment becomes modular, temporary, or symbolic. The idea of a lifelong career dissolves. Now I want to go even deeper into this scenario. As scarcity loosens its grip, civilization faces a question it has long postponed. If survival no longer demands constant labor, what does productivity actually mean? For some, value shifts toward creativity. Building, designing, imagining, and expressing. For others, it concentrates around control of systems, those who manage algorithms, energy orchestration, and decision-making infrastructure. And for many, a quieter reality emerges, dependence, not on oil, but on networks they do not own and barely understand. Along this journey, daily routines transform. Time stretches in unfamiliar ways. Without the pressure and necessity, decisions feel heavier, not lighter. Freedom requires direction, and direction requires meaning. The collective mentality begins to fragment. Some communities thrive, experimenting with new cultural norms and shared purpose. Others drift, struggling to replace the structure that work once provided. The transformation is uneven, deeply human, and often invisible from the outside. Revelations surface slowly. Abundance does not guarantee fulfillment. Efficiency does not create purpose. The hidden truth in the background of this future is unsettling. When energy scarcity disappears, it takes with external force that once organized civilization. What remains is choice and the responsibility that comes with it. Status, once tied to income or occupation, becomes fluid. Identity becomes narrative rather than position. People are valued for insight, adaptability, or influence within systems. Others are marginalized by their distance from them. This is not collapse, but profound redefinition, a civilizational pivot where humanity must decide what it stands for when the old metrics no longer apply. And as this post-oil society continues its journey, one unresolved tension remains, because the systems shaping meaning, value, and direction are still evolving, and the next shift may redefine everything once again. Write in the comments. That makes sense to me. As this alternate timeline continues to unfold, oil no longer feels like a fallen asset. It feels like a forgotten one. Within a single generation, something that once shaped wars, borders, alliances, and daily life fades into the background of history, not because it was defeated, but because it was outgrown. The pipelines remain. The fields still exist. But civilization no longer orbits around them. When this new order stabilizes, the realization settles in quietly. The real disruption was never just economic. It was civilizational. Oil once acted as an organizing force. It dictated where cities formed, which nations held power, how labor was structured, and how progress was measured. When it loses that role, the vacuum it leaves behind forces humanity to confront deeper questions it had long postponed. In the early years, value is still measured in familiar terms: capital, efficiency, control of infrastructure. Governments and megacorporations continue to compete over systems and data. But over time, another transformation begins to surface beneath the numbers. People start to sense that productivity alone no longer explains worth. Growth no longer guarantees direction. The mentalidade collectiva begins to shift. Now I want to go even deeper into this final layer. In a world where energy scarcity no longer defines survival, what becomes valuable instead is not immediately obvious. Is it creativity? The ability to imagine and build meaning beyond necessity? Is it trust in systems so complex no individual can fully understand them? Or is it autonomy? The capacity to exist outside automated decision-making without becoming irrelevant? Along this journey, societies wrestle with quiet revelations. When abundance removes pressure, it also removes excuses. When systems run themselves, responsibility moves inward. The truth hidden in the background of this future is uncomfortable. Oil once gave humanity a common external struggle. Without it, civilization must define purpose without an enemy, without scarcity, without urgency imposed from the outside. Status becomes fluid. Power becomes subtle. Influence shifts from ownership to narrative, from production to interpretation. The most important decisions are no longer about extraction or distribution, but about direction, about what deserves attention, about what should be optimized and what should not. And as this post-oil world continues to evolve, one unresolved question remains suspended in the air. Because if oil is no longer the foundation of civilization, then the next force that replaces it will shape everything that comes after, in ways we are only beginning to understand. Write in the comments. That makes sense to me. If you stayed with the simulation until the end, it tells me something important. It tells me you're not just watching, you're thinking. This channel exists for exactly that reason: to explore what if economy scenarios, alternate futures, and deep simulations about where the global economy might be heading when familiar structures begin to fade. If this journey added clarity, tension, or even discomfort in a meaningful way, subscribing keeps you inside these explorations as they continue. Each video builds on the last, connecting future predictions into a broader picture of how technology, power, and human decisions reshape civilization. If this future made you pause and reflect, leave a comment saying, "This future really made me think." It's a simple way to mark that you reached the end of the journey, and it helps this kind of content reach others who are asking the same questions. And if the simulation helped you see the world a little differently, a like quietly signals that these conversations matter. There's another scenario waiting right here that connects directly with this one. Click, and keep going with me into the next alternate economic future. Which alternate economic future should I explore next?